Okay, hello there, and greetings. Today I am going to give a lecture on why people conform. Why is it that you see people do things in mobs and so forth, or even just general behavior, and you're asking, haven't people thought about the origins of this? Why do they do what they do? And one of the explanations I'm going to present, although in later series I'm going to deal with some of the other topics as well, other theories. One is from Albert Bandura, known as social learning theory. And I don't know if you can see this on the board so well, social learning theory. The way that this works is very similar to behaviorism, although unlike behaviorism, it goes into the details of thought processes, which often B.F. Skinner seemed not to put a lot of emphasis on. And when it comes to social learning theory, the idea is this. You come into the world, you want to adapt, you want to get those good feelings of people approving you. And of course that's called reinforcement, because it feels good for people to say, good job, Johan, or good job, Alicia. Even as an infant, it feels great. And it doesn't feel so good when someone scolds you, either punishes you physically or, shuns you. Well, we don't want anything to do with you, you're weird. And these kinds of things. So what Bandura would suggest is we're constantly watching what's going on in our world. We're constantly taking appraisal of what's going on. And then we integrate that within our framework, into our minds, so that then we will be able to function within our social settings. So what he would say is, even when you're just a little infant, you start getting those kinds of approval. And then when you get the approval for any behavior whatsoever, whether it's laughing at mom when she's feeding you at the table, and then she laughs back and is very approving, or you say your first words, you will continue doing those kinds of things. Again, that sounds like very basic behaviorism. However, the important thing is you start to mimic these things. You start doing the same thing with your interactions initially with your siblings, your brothers, your sisters, your parents. And then as you grow, you start watching what other people are doing, whether that's at your place of worship, whether that is on television, daycare, school, whatever. You start to do the things you see. You imitate. And then whatever happens, you're either praised or you're not praised. You're either accepted into a new social network like your peers, or people push you away. When they push you away, you start to say, wait a minute, why is he popular and I'm not? Why is she popular and I'm not? So you start integrating these things into your repertoire of behaviors. And then maybe you start dressing different or acting different, and people start paying attention to you, and you get that social approval. Now the thing is, of course, you're going to ask, well, don't people act differently in different cultures? Of course, because different cultures have evolved in different ways, and so therefore children from day one within that culture are going to be integrated differently. Whether it's the kind of foods we eat, it could be that, if you grow up you're going to definitely grow up differently if you grow up in a vegan commune than if you grow up on a ranch. You're going to have a different idea of like animals and food and things like that. And then you're going to get the approval and reinforcement from that society you grow up in. And the most famous experiment that Bandura used to illustrate this was the Bobo the Clown experiment. What he did, this was in the early 60s, he brought in children who were they were left in a room that had lots of toys. All of a sudden, a a woman comes in, usually it was a woman, to mimic the mother, and so forth. And the mother would get this inflatable clown. It's one of those ones that has a base at the bottom, and it's kind of like this. And so if you push it, it just comes back. Push it, it comes back. And in the experiment, they observed how the children behaved if the woman would come in and start screaming at the clown and start punching it. Just really being violent. And then she would leave. What would the child do? In almost every case, the child would get up, go over to the clown, push it around it, and start imitating the behavior. And start punching or yelling and stuff. This is, it was imitation. Monkey see, monkey do type of thing. And then the next time, with other children, they might bring in the woman who would then just say something nice to the clown and just kind of play a little bit. And the children would say things nice to the clown and start playing because they're imitating adults in order that they fit into society as well. And so a lot has been said about, well, maybe what we watch on television. Now I remember, that could have an effect on kids. I remember a lecture series I had on this in university, and the professor noted that studies show that the more realistic television is in regards to violence, the more likely the child will imitate it. So if a child's watching a crazy cartoon, like a Tom and Jerry or something like that, they're far less likely to imitate that behavior than if they see a situation where maybe you have the leading man and woman screaming at each other, or one of them slaps the other one. Because that's realistic. That's something they can they can go, yeah, okay, this is people being people, versus a silly cartoon figure, or even things that are like science fiction violence, robots coming in and attacking you or something like that. The kids don't generally then become aggressive. The thing is, though, that this makes it very difficult if we learn this way and we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of images that build up in us and then reinforce us. It's very difficult for people to break away from that. So if you, for instance, live in a culture where you eat noodles for breakfast, like in China, and you come into a culture that you're used to eating cornflakes for breakfast, then you're going to look at the person eating the noodles going, what in the heck is that all about? That's kind of weird. Because you have a way of judging the world. Your schema or perception is different than what the person eating the noodles is thinking. And they're going to look at you maybe funny, like, why are they eating this kind of milky, crunchy stuff? And, but this goes on into many, many behaviors. This can go into the way you judge people, the way they dress. If you grow up in a culture, if you grow up in a nudist colony, you're going to have a much different way of looking at people and judging them than if you grew up in a very traditional Amish society. And that's not going to be because, you're not thinking correctly. It's because this is the way you've been used to growing up and seeing the world, and therefore the world is that way. And the same would be true of politics. Whether you grew up in a right-wing house or a left-wing house, the same would be true of everything, just everything. Now, you're probably wondering though, wait a minute, what about people that become deviant? What about people that belong to subcultures, like someone belongs to a nudist colony, or someone belongs to a radical vegan cult or something, or someone belongs to some sort of gang in the inner cities? How does this work if we've learned the way that our culture tells us through media, schools, our religions, and our parents? Well, you remember back when I was talking about the idea that some people, they may feel like outsiders, and then they look at other people and go, maybe I should behave this way and fit in with everyone else and conform to what everyone else is doing and saying and thinking. However, there is always the possibility that what happens is you're kind of on the outside, and then you meet someone who's also kind of on the outside. And maybe they don't conform to the way that the society tells you to. Maybe they, they dress differently, they have different rules, they have different reinforcement. Like maybe you're in a classroom and you see some kids raise their hand, the teacher goes, yes, thank you very much. But yet you also see your friend who mouths off to the teacher. And some of the other students are laughing, and then when the teacher kicks him out of the class, they're all like, oh, he's cool. And then you start thinking, wait a minute. Maybe instead of being like the kids who are raising their hand and getting the approval of the teacher, I'll be like the class clown or the rebel. And then you start associating with those particular students, and you start getting reinforced. And then this becomes more you. Or the same can happen if you join a gang. You know, the gang members have their initiations and their expectations, their own culture. You belong to a certain political group. They will have those kinds of things too. And so this is where you get deviance and subcultures with this theory. Even though this theory sounds like it should just make everyone the same, you can belong to a group, but then when you belong to that group, that's a very interesting note, often their rules of conformity are greater than the general society, because any sort of deviation from the group, let's say you belong to a really left-wing group, and suddenly you see some politician, there's some politician that's considered right-wing, and she says something, and then that you actually like her stand, and then you tell your friends, you say, hey, I think her ideas about this are really good, and they're looking at you like, wait a minute, what you're like one of them? You're a traitor. You shouldn't be this way. How dare you? And I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, and then you step back and become more like what they're saying because you want the social approval. Now, one other thing I need to note about this is often when young people are in school or even in universities, they do this adaptation, but maybe it's serving them when they're younger. Maybe it's kind of cool to be radical in university. But then when you get out into the workforce and you go back to that general culture, and then you meet someone, you get married, you're expecting your first child, suddenly something happens often, and that is that now you don't know how to really adapt where you're at to how you've been raised. And so often the way you've been raised starts to go back to it starts taking more precedence in your life. And you start going back to, you might be like identify as a radical atheist or something, and then all of a sudden you're expecting your first child, you're thinking, wow, church was really fun. When I was little, maybe we could visit once in a while and these kinds of things. And then, maybe 5 years down the line, you've got 2, 3 kids, and you're getting ready on Sunday morning to go to church with the family. And you do that every Sunday. And actually, you might actually be more radically inclined to accept that particular way of living now than someone who never broke away from it. And you become more devoted to it. So all the social learning theory can explain conformity in society. It can explain crime, why some people just can't get out of crime unless you take them away from the environment that actually reinforces it. And it can explain why some kids just have a hard time adapting to school and so forth, but also can explain why some people are able to break away and to start having new ideas and so forth. But it's difficult. The cultures change very slowly because, well, it's a large culture. You don't want it changing, immediately. So, look into this in more detail. I think you'll find it interesting, but it can explain a lot of the behaviors that you sometimes just don't know why people are the way they are. And that's all for social learning theory. Take care.